Welcome back to the TGS podcast, where I am once again joined by Tim Weston of the National Gamekeepers Organisation.
Hi Johnny, how you doing? Good to see you again.
And you, mate. I'm doing really well. What about you?
I'm doing really well. We're going to have a new government or a group of politicians soon. So that's going to be exciting. Lots of work to do there. The sun's been out for about 45 minutes this summer, so that's been nice as well. All's good in the Garden of Eden, mate.
It's been an interesting build-up to this election for sure, and by the time this goes out, everyone will know who's in charge. We currently don't. I guess I'm nervous, but at the same time, we are just pawns in the whole thing, and as we said when we spoke last, we'll deal with whatever comes as best we possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely, John, and I think there'll be a lot of stuff to sort out on all fronts politically. For whoever gets in, so it's going to be an interesting 12 months ahead.
On a more exciting note, I'm shooting the Bretta Worlds on Friday. I'm kind of excited for that. That's way more interesting to me than who's going to be in charge of the country for the next 4 years.
It's way more interesting to me, and I do the politics, so I think that's really good. It's good to see you're hard at work practicing, by the way, mate. That's great.
I've put my Bretta t-shirt on. That's basically as close as I'm going to get to practicing for this. What's interesting is they every year they have a VIP day. I mean, most of these sort of branded shoots do. I spoke to Michael, who's been on the gun review, who works in the gun shop. He was invited up. He shot it. He's not a terrible shot. And he's telling me there's not many people there broke 90 out of 120, and there were some very capable shots. I think he shot a 73, which is, it's over half just. I'm not nervous, but I'm excited to see it.
Well, I think those people probably weren't using Berettas, you see. So I know it's the Beretta World Challenge, but I would imagine that's why. Yeah, but the low scores will be people who are sneaking in other guns, and all the high scores will be the proper guns that it's designed for. You see,
yeah, 100%. They're just setting targets that can only be shot by Berettas. That's why you can shoot only a Beretta. Must be the case, right? But that's going to be cool. That's actually kind of a highlight.
I think that's going to be really good fun, and I can't wait to watch a video.
So we've just established that shooting a once-a-year clay shoot is more exciting to both of us than the potential politics. But I think the politics are just an overbearingly tough part of both of our jobs and lives. So moving on swiftly to something way more exciting. Today we're going to talk about reintroductions of top-end predators and, generally speaking, how apex species are more interesting than grass.
Well, to you maybe, Johnny, and to many conservationists, but there are some people who are really into purple lesser spotted orchids that also need a helping hand, or chuffs, or grey partridges. So apex predators seem to get the headlines. The more important stuff seems to get neglected, and that's one of my real bugbears with conservationists and wildlife trusts and funders, people who fund these projects.
So I think we should start with the fact that for the most part, I think from a press perspective, yes. But no mow May has become a real big thing this year across many county councils, and I think that's really cool. I'm a big no mower. I am a conservationist. I love insects, and I've been working real hard at getting my kids actually actively involved in wildlife, because I think inherently worms and spiders are weird, and culturally people don't like them. So you actually have to put a bit of effort in to get them to be cool. And now my 3-year-old has a worm farm and all this kind of thing. And most of that was instigated by just not mowing the garden and not giving them a choice of cleanliness. They had to go get involved. And I see that across every verge across the New Forest District Council area that I live in, at least. And I think that's awesome. Unless you have hay fever, of course, but I don't, so that's fine. So I do think, before we sort of start going into the priorities, I think that there has been at least some recognition that grass is cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And like where I live, they had no mow May again, and you do notice a difference. There are more insects. You can hear crickets, which you wouldn't hear on a flat piece of grass. But this is the point, I think.
And your windscreen has bugs on. My windscreen hasn't had bugs on around where I live for 7 years. And this year I have actively had to buy screen wash, and I am so excited by that. I know it's pathetic.
But it is pathetic. See, we've talked about this before. I'm a fly fisherman, so when I see bugs on the windscreen, that makes my heart fill with joy, because bugs are the building blocks of everything, and we seem to forget that, especially if you're a wild bird keeper or you're a fisherman, fly fisherman. Bugs are so important. They start everything off. So No Mow May is really exciting. It's a really good project. I wish more farms would do it. When you come out of the council place. You see the farmers topping the headlands around the wheat. That really bugs me when they do that. That could wait till at least harvest, or probably doesn't actually need doing.
Yeah, and inherently it always feels like they're just doing it just because. It serves no practical purpose other than, I suppose, having a buffer of weeds into their crops, but then they're spraying it all off, so it doesn't make a damn difference.
Crops have already grown, so it's... Yeah, exactly. So I think we've got some work to do. But John, I think you're making the point that I would like to make, is the fact that you care about grass, you care about worms and bugs, and maybe care is not the right word, but you're interested in them and you want them to exist.
Oh, I definitely care about insects. Like, they provide a lot. Well, from just a personal point of view, without all the big holistic conservation bollocks, insects are super cool. Like, when you find a new caterpillar in the garden, that's like one of those cool things that you get to then go and find out what it is. 9 times out of 10, when a bird flies into the garden, I've seen it before, I know what it is. There is a limited amount, by comparison to insects, of birds. Insects, I know a lot, but there is, even in my own garden, things I see that I've never seen before, and I find that is its own little adventure. And I think that's cool. That's the marketing point of view from an insect, right? Is you got to catch them all. Birds, it's easy.
Yeah, and you can actually, with the kids, you can go on a safari without really leaving your own property, because you can identify 12 or 14 different things, creepy crawlies, just by lifting up bricks and looking under plant leaves. So they're really important, but they're really important. Everyone accepts they're really important. Everybody knows they're really important, but they're not really exciting, so they don't get... And I'm using insects, well, we're using insects. They don't get talked about in the same level as releasing a pine marten in the New Forest, for instance. So you wouldn't get the South or the Hampshire Wildlife Trust saying, okay, what we're going to do, we're going to try and get a £2.5 million lottery grant fund to improve habitats for slow worms, for instance.
No, that'd be pretty cool, though.
For you and I, maybe. But for the funders, it might not be as cool as them saying, I'd like £2.5 million to release a pine marten into the New Forest. And that's my bugbear. That's the thing I wanted to talk about today, is apex predators seem to be every conservationist's wish list at the minute, and they seem to be neglecting the actual conservation-y part of conservation.
Okay, and we're talking here about mostly the constant argument or conversation that comes up. It makes newspaper headlines, which I find insane, about reintroducing big cats, big dogs, big ferrets into the wildlife.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And it does make big headlines. Any large mammal seems to capture the imagination, whether it's an escaped farm animal or a released pine marten, a lynx project, beavers, whatever it happens to be. But the large mammals, or medium-sized to large mammals, within reason, seem to get the headlines and seem to be the ones that are talked about. And they tend to be, that list I said, with the exception of the beaver, they tend to be something that's going to eat quite a lot of other things, potentially.
It's quite a top-heavy thing to introduce when you haven't sorted the baseline out. If you look at this from like a business plan or a building, let's say you're just building a shed in the garden. You need a foundation, and then you need a structure, and then you need something on the outside, and then finally you paint it. I feel like a wolf is the paint, really, to the otherwise a neglected structure that is the British countryside. And I say neglected, you may disagree, but there's an awful lot of places that aren't looked after to the degree that they should be looked after. From building a shed out in our wildlife, it's a terrible analogy, isn't it? But I'm dying on this hill. The shed needs to be built, and I feel like, yes, there is some building of the shed, but it's not enough of a building yet to support some paint.
You don't start with a roof.
No,
you start with the
you don't start with the roof.
You start with the base. Yeah. You start at the bottom, and I feel that's what's happening, because if we take, I don't know, lynx, 400 years ago the lynx were eradicated. Might be slightly more from southern England, let's say,
for a pretty good reason. Some would say. Yeah.
But so over the last 400 years, our ecosystem has evolved without them. And other species have taken some niches or been able to get a foothold. So species that lynx might prey on, for example, have managed to get a foothold. Now, they may not be native. It could be things like the hare. So brown hare, not necessarily considered native. Rabbits in some places, sheep farming, etc., etc. So we've evolved we've gone down a different route. Now, there's nothing to say we can't backpedal and put those species back into the ecosystem. Lynx or wildcat or wolf is one that is being talked about in Scotland. But we've got to look at the reasons why and what will sustain them. And that's the bit that concerns me, is mainly the reason why. And I don't think because they used to be here is a really valid reason, because then we can say that about so much stuff. For instance, wild boar. If you wanted to release wild boar, there would be outcry. You wouldn't be able to because of the damage they might cause. Now, there's nothing to say that any of these other species won't cause damage.
I mean, it's more than likely, right? They've got bigger, sharper teeth. And yeah, the damage is likely to be more direct and bloody than a wild boar, which it's, as you see, it looks like a ploughed field. Did you know that when lynx went extinct, the population of England, or the UK, was 4 million?
4 million. Where are we now? 100 and something million?
No, there's 70 odd million, I think, in the UK, isn't it? 65, 70 million?
That's still quite a
yeah,
lot.
Oh no, I'll Google it. It was like I just Googled that.
10 times more. I didn't know that, and that's quite telling.
67 million. Yeah, 67 million in 2022, okay. So more now, likely.
Yeah, so 3.5 times. So, and lynx went extinct because it states habitat destruction and hunting, I would imagine, is what it'll say.
I think if you look at where the UK was in that time period, there wasn't like subsidies or grants in particular, was there? So if something ate your sheep and your sheep is what kept you alive, you'd kill it. And if you go to other countries that still survive on agriculture properly in a more basic way, say you've been to Africa, certain African countries, you go there, it's pretty devoid of wildlife except for the sheep, because the sheep is the priority. And I get it. I guess in that context you can be unhappy about it. But at the same period, if that was my sheep in 1600s England, I'd kill the lynx if it came after my sheep, and I wouldn't think twice about it. Because it wasn't a choice of, oh, that's a beautiful cat. It's a choice of feed your family or not. And I guess we're now at a beautiful position where we don't even have to have that in context, because we can import food, we can grow food without, and blah, blah, blah. We're significantly less subsistence-based.
So as a general population, you're absolutely spot on. We don't need those specific sheep, those 12 sheep that lynx has eaten. We don't need those. You and I and 67 million other people probably don't need those specific sheep. But the one person that was rearing those sheep to feed their family does need their sheep.
Yeah, right. I think unless you basically get government subsidies to pay them for every sheep, that inherently is ridiculous. By the way, we've been quoting terrible statistics. The lynx survived longest in Scotland until it finally went extinct 1,300 years ago. Okay, so that would be about 700 AD, correct? All right, UK population in 700 AD was about 500,000 to 1 million, give or take.
Gosh.
It's not the population of Southampton.
I was going to say, that's not even Southampton or Portsmouth, is it? That's, that's a market town in the Midlands somewhere.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's across
I mean, when you actually put it into context, I think, we've been probably talking wolf things. The lynx was a long time before. That's a long time ago. I was actually listening to a podcast by an American friend of mine, and he's basically saying rewilding's cool, but rewilding to what point? Because you have to sort of take into context that people have been moving and working and living, and humans have been on the ground in England for a very long time. Scotland, Britain.
Yeah.
And there's not been a point where we didn't have an effect. So rewilding is an interesting concept, and especially when it comes to releasing top-end predators. It's just, the whole thing seems a bit weird to me. I feel safe walking around in England.
I don't think I feel unsafe with lynx, but I see rewilding as wildlife farming. I don't think it... So rewilding, to my mind, and we're whether we're talking about top-line predators or we're talking about flora type of rewilding, to my mind, is you shut the gate and walk away. That's rewilding. You do nothing.
But that's inherently ridiculous, because unless you can have that in a controlled environment, which it's not. Let's say we did that with a farm in Wiltshire. Pick a farm in Wiltshire that's 1,500 acres. Let's shut the gate. Let's just take into context. Ant's estate is next to public ground that is not managed. It's rewilded to a certain extent, other than the people walking their dogs. His stuff affects what happens there. There's not a hard barrier, it's not a high fence, and the stuff that happens there affects him. So inherently, the foxes that live there come onto his and they die, and the birds that live on his and survive go onto there and they die. And so it's not really rewilding unless you do put a Eden Project-esque dome over it. Imagine like the Truman Show.
I think that's what that's the point. I don't think we can rewild. I think we can wildlife farm. So whatever we're doing, like your American Friends podcast said, everything we do as a human species has an impact. So, and it takes, I think it takes more effort to do nothing than it does to do something. So to shut the gate and walk away takes more effort than a human intervening, because our nature will want us to do something about it. So I don't, the term, it's more the term rewilding I've got a problem with than the actual process of rewilding, because I don't think it is rewilding. I think it's a different kind of conservation from what I was doing as a gamekeeper, for example. So if you think about the two things side by side, first step in the three-legged stool for gamekeeping is habitat management. So it's creating a habitat for the species that you want to live there, whether that's a grouse moor, a lowland shoot, a wetland. The second stool is providing protection from predation, which is, like you said, killing the foxes or controlling the crows, whatever it happens to be that's going to predate on them. And the third one is food and water. So they're the basic things that any animal needs to survive: protection, food, sustenance, and somewhere to live. Now, rewilding is essentially the same with fewer bits. If you take down in the southeast Net, for example, they rewild, but they do deer management, but no predation control. So why are you going to kill a deer but not a predator? Well, because the deer's going to eat a tree that you want to grow. Therefore, it's not rewilding. It's still manipulating the environment to be what you want it to be. That's my view on it. That's how I see rewilding.
Yeah, and, from a rewilding perspective, NEP has... It's not really that wild when you can go and do safaris around it in a Land Rover, camp on it, walk over it. It's just a different type of land management. It's a very fashionable type of land management. Getting back to apex predators, what is the NGO's stance on apex predator reintroductions? Ardent no?
Okay, so...
Firm maybe?
No, it's not. So it's any reintroduction or introduction, our stance is we're not against it as long as it's the right species in the right location for the right reason. So pine martens into the Snowdonia Mountains in mid Wales that the Sylvia Foundation did. The project we were involved with, we were consulted with in the start, we weren't inherently against that particular project because it's the right species for that area. The reason was more to see if they could do it. It was a scientific piece of research. And within the licensing agreement, they built in a get out of problem clause. So if there were pine martens, these things did become a problem, they built in a clause that they could do lethal and non-lethal control for this species. So the whole licensing that they put together, was incredibly sensible. So when it follows the IUCN guidelines and it's a sensible project, you can't really argue against it. And we wouldn't want to. A similar project down on Dartmoor, which is called the Two Moors Project, which I'm going to be meeting the guy who's running it quite soon, has got National Lottery Heritage funding to release pine martens onto Dartmoor, really close to the last two pairs of curlew, Eurasian curlew, that nest on Dartmoor's nesting location. So, and this is part of the problem, because the curlew is actually far more important to save than the pine marten, in my opinion. So why are we releasing a pine marten really close to the nesting site of the last two pairs? It's bonkers. It makes no conservation sense to me. And I think it's because it's far easier to get funding to release an apex predator than it is to protect a bird that's on the brink.
Yeah, a beige-coloured bird that no one cares about, right? We made that film with you guys and actually got really lucky to go and see and get involved in the re-release of curlew, and that was awesome. But the peppering, Sussex. But that's almost entirely privately funded project.
It's entirely privately funded project from a landowner who didn't want the demise of the curlew to happen on his land during his watch. So using gamekeepers, it's a really cool project. Probably what he wouldn't like is if there's a massive block of woodland next to his project, is somebody to dump some apex predators there. That would be counterproductive to what he's trying to achieve, and this is part of the issue. But in 25 years' time, if he's achieved his goal and there is a surplus number of curlew nesting, breeding, self-colonising, then there's no issue that you get the next block in the chain and the next block in the chain, because you've achieved the bottom, you've achieved the prey species. So he's got the habitat right first. That's the first bit they did. Then he's giving the prey species a helping hand. Then
it's a wild grey partridge shoot, so they do a great amount of habitat work, which is ergo good for lots of things. But what's kind of interesting, and I listen to a lot of American conservation podcasts, the difference is that they have a lot of space they don't have to farm. It's a much harder thing to keep the balance on a piece of ground that you have to make productive for food as well.
I think you're absolutely right, but you can do it, and that particular place in Sussex, Peppering, has shown that with micro rewilding. So really simple things they've established onto this farm, and it is about wild grey partridge shooting. Let's be honest about it. That's why they do it. So, for example, when they're
I think that's where they start, but it always becomes more than that. You speak to any owner or keeper or someone involved in a wild grey partridge project, it's not half as much about the shooting once it starts. The obsession becomes with other things like the reintroduction of a curlew, or we want those birds on that hedge because actually because shooting is there goes so irregular, you do end up getting fascinated in the micro detail of everything, which is cool. It's definitely
I think it's
awesome.
It's addictive, which is why conservationists get involved in it as well. So that's why shooters get involved in conservation. You might start off as a clay shooter to try and shoot 50 targets on a Sunday morning, and then you get invited pigeon shooting, and then you get invited game shooting, and then you see the bits that go round with it. Then all of a sudden you're helping your little syndicate dig a duck pond that you're never going to shoot because you want newts. And do you know what I mean? So I think shooters and conservationists are very similar in that respect. But you can do really simple things like on the South Downs. They turn off the sprayer that's spraying the headland. So not all of it, just the boom that touches from the tram line to the headland. They don't spray the insects there, so that you still get insecticide and pesticides on the field, and herbicides, but not in the key areas where birds live, which are around the edges. So you can.
I wonder what the net loss is to the crops on that estate. I reckon it's very low single figure percentage of loss.
And what they actually do is they harvest the headland and they feed that to the wild birds because it's full of weed seeds and stuff. They don't want that going through the grain store, so it's got another net gain for nature. So it's farming. You can do it, right? It can be done, and it doesn't necessarily need to be expensive. You don't need to go full NEP and turn everything off because we still need to feed the nation. We still want to have shooting. We still want to have other land uses. It doesn't just have to be about rewilding, and it doesn't have to and rewilding shouldn't just be about apex predators.
I guess a lot of this just boils down to money, right? You look at something like NEP, they make a lot of money through the rewilding concept and marketing, and I presume the same thing with reintroducing large predators. I appreciate it's pretty cool. Like, who doesn't want a wolf? Wolves are cool. Lynx are cool. They're definitely cool. Whether they really can be supported in modern United Kingdom grounds is a conversation for another day. But is it just because they can get a huge grant and then sit around with binoculars for the next 5 years? Even if it doesn't go ahead, they get funding? Is that fair? Is that right?
I think that is about spot on. So I think some of the...
in which case I might go pro-wolf reintroduction. If I can sit around for 5 years, do nothing, get paid by the government, hey, we're on to a winner there, mate.
Yeah, so I know, for example, the Two Moors project, they had a press release out last week saying they've secured £2.5 million of National Lottery Heritage funding to move the project on and complete the project. So that funding that they've got will be to employ an individual to do stakeholder engagements. That means anyone that's interested, talk to them, try and convince them the project's right, talk to farmers, talk to gamekeepers, talk to other conservationists. They conducted a survey which was quite interesting, but very few, I looked at it the other day, very few farmers, very few land managers responded. The demographic was 16 to 25, 65 to 80.
Wow.
Yeah, so it shows where they're targeting. It's quite clever targeting, isn't it? If you want, you don't write a survey for an answer you don't want. You write a survey for an answer you want, and that's the key to it. But
can you get surveys peer reviewed? Surely there must be like a peer review system for a survey.
Yeah, there is, but you don't want to get it peer reviewed because it'll show the flaws in your survey, won't it? So, but broadly speaking, the general public are pro reintroductions. And because most reintroductions are apex predators, I think the general school of thought is that most of the general public are pro-apex predators. But I'd imagine if you asked them about the reintroduction of white cranes to the Broads, they'd probably be pro that. I think it's a really cool project. Without being rude to the general public, I'm not entirely sure their opinion counts as much as a shepherd on Dartmoor or a a conservation ranger on a bird reserve on Dartmoor. I think that those people who are or a gamekeeper even, those people who are working there and living it probably should have a bit of a better say than the people who are visiting for 3 days in their caravan over the August bank holiday. And I also think
don't
some
know
of the
what
economic
people think, how
arguments-
people think it would actually benefit them is always an interesting one, right? Because this isn't like a cow. You're not going to see any of these animals ever, not in the daytime walking around anyway. Right, so why do people want it? Is there any studies on this, or is it just because they think it would be a nice thing to do?
I think because the question is, pine martins used to exist in this area and were extinct due to hunting and habitat loss. Do you think they should be reintroduced?
Okay, so it's just a very basic hypothetical question. That's fair enough.
Yeah, so... Yeah, I mean, if you ask me that question, yeah, I think they probably ought to be reintroduced. But what's the reason?
Yeah, what will actually happen thereafter, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you speak
So I
to
think-
people in different countries where they have had wolf reintroductions, or more importantly, wolves have walked back in and been allowed to do so. They're not like hugely popular in anyone in the countryside. Most of these people dislike them, don't want them because of the damage they do. Which is strange.
Yeah,
The
I
people
think
actually
you're right.
living there don't get that much of a say, and magically
and
they're
I
not
think some of the
millionaires off of
arguments-
tourism.
Yeah, well, that's actually it could be a fair point. So some of the reasons for a introduction or reintroduction of one of these apex predators is ecotourism and wildlife watching. That's,
For the hit rate of someone going and finding a lynx without a dog and chasing up a tree or whatever.
Yeah.
You could just tell people they were there. Just say there, put some branding and be like, "Yeah, we reintroduced lynx. They're definitely there. Come and have a look."
So I think that's quite interesting, and there's also something. So you know, are you going to see a lynx? Probably not. Probably never. Are you going to see a pine marten? Almost certainly not. They're pretty nocturnal and hide a lot. Are you going to see a wolf?
Like most
You'd hope
mustelids, you
not.
might see it dead on the road.
Yeah, and I think that, like in Scotland, I go to Scotland a lot, and I've never seen one running about in the trees, but I've seen them flattened on the road, and I think that would probably be the case.
If you took like a standard statistic, whenever you speak to someone who's not a hunter or like particularly cunch, ask them. Most of them say, "You ever seen a deer?" I reckon the majority of the UK has never seen a deer. And yet you sit in a car with someone who isn't like that, and you point them out the window, and as soon their eyes start to get attuned, and they can go, "Oh, there's another one, and there's another one." But these people, you can speak to someone who's 40 years old who's never seen a deer. I'll see one on the drive home most days.
Yeah, exactly. It's about knowing where to look and how to. I mean, the other thing that I was reading the same article about ecotourism, these things you're never going to see, is property values. So it stated that areas known for wildlife conservation efforts and biodiversity, including the presence of species like pine martens, will see an increased property value due to their appeal to homeowners and investors seeking proximity to nature. Now, if you speak to anyone that lives in Austria or southern Germany and they've got pine martens around their houses, they are not happy individuals because things go in the loft and they eat everything. They are
Really?
a mustelid. They're like a squirrel. So my godfather lives in Munich, just outside of Munich, and he got in his car a year ago to go to the shops, and it was cold. It was winter time, get very cold down in Munich. Pine marten had crawled up inside the engine bay to keep warm overnight and chewed through all the HT leads and caused
mate.
900 euros. Yeah, 900 euros worth of damage to his car. So it's quite interesting that some of the stuff spouted out is really difficult to disprove. I don't know if house prices go up because there's pine martens, but I know from talking to colleagues.
I think that's an easy piece of like bollocks, right? Because generally speaking, houses in the countryside near beautiful places are worth more money, and in those places they could probably make that link very easily without actually standing up to any scrutiny whatsoever. And again, not against it in the slightest. Why not? From a houses being more valuable near wildlife perspective, that makes sense. It's nicer to live somewhere that's not, suburbia. But
yeah, of course it is.
Interesting.
So I tell you what, Johnny, I this is a bit left field. This isn't something we've talked about before. I'm going to give you the three species. No, I'm going to give you three species of predators in a UK context. You are going to place them where you think they should be released. All right. Now you can't say I don't think they should be. So this is a game. European brown bear. Where should we let those go?
Somewhere where we don't like the people. Wales. Stick them in Wales. Really.
Okay, my answer's Hyde Park. Right, Where do you think the Eurasian lynx should be released in England? In the UK, sorry.
In the UK, I mean, I'm going to go with Wales. It makes sense to dump everything in Wales. There's more mountains, and it's closer to go than
not a bad
Scotland from a
idea.
tourism perspective.
Loads of sheep for them to eat.
Yeah, this is
Loads
it.
of
Like,
sheep.
so,
There's a good food source. So you've actually ticked the boxes with that one. My criteria. So right species, right area, right reason. You know.
okay.
And then what about wolves? So we're going to release wolves into the United Kingdom. Where are they going to go?
See, I've been down the rabbit hole on wolves. Wolves is possibly one of the hardest things to actually place, given the range and size. Northern Ireland.
Good
And then the
decision. So very similar to
big,
mine. So mine's
very large body of water.
yeah. So mine's brown bear, definitely Hyde Park. Lynx is Epping Forest, and wolves is the Isle of Wight. So
I mean, you
now-
really aren't onto a bad one. The house prices in the Isle of Wight are terrible. So putting all these things here with sort of real economical crisis on the island.
absolutely relieve the NHS because old people can't run that fast. There's some real benefits to it, but
It's a good test
point of
bed,
this-
right? If you're going to release a large predator, put it in a contained area. Isle of Man's too small. Ireland is a tough one, too big. Isle of Wight, perfect. Also, really convenient to go and watch them.
You can do it from the coast, sail round and round and round it in circles, so you don't get eaten. But that little game we've just played, as far as I'm concerned, is genuinely how I see these conservationists picking their release locations for these species.
Yeah, far
It's
away
like-
from me, but somewhere that makes me feel good.
It's like, right, Johnny, let's go and have a pint, and we're going to go and talk about our £2.5 million funding to put this species somewhere. Dartmoor, that'll do. Right, let's now have a drink because we've solved.
Yeah, well, we've got a spare million. We'll just throw a million at people and marketing until someone says yes. And when we run out of money, we'll go, we tried.
Yeah.
That is
So-
it's an epic con, isn't it? This is government money.
No, I don't think the Two Moors project is government money. It's lottery funding. It's heritage funding. So you can do for the lottery heritage fund. You can there's criteria you meet, which is quite a high bar, but as long as you're enhancing the heritage of the United Kingdom, you can apply for it. And then it goes into: are you enhancing the natural resources of the country? Are you improving nature? Etc. etc. So if you can tick the boxes yes to all of those, you can then apply for a grant. So for instance, the newish larder that was built for Forestry England, a government body in the Forest of Dean, was funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund because they're killing wild boar to protect us all from wild boar.
Where does
But
lottery
the
money
heritage-
come from? The lottery tickets?
Lottery tickets, yeah. So lottery money
Okay.
comes, so a percentage of everything. So they take their costs out. They then use that money, the leftover money, to fund projects. And they've done some cool stuff. They've funded some playgrounds. Up
That's
Avon
cool.
was funded by National Lottery funding. So it's not. It's actually if you've got a conservation project. Let's say you're a small syndicate, and maybe this is actually a topic we talk about. But let's say you're a small syndicate and you want to do a conservation project which will enhance the national heritage or the flora and fauna of the United Kingdom, especially if it's a triple SI, you can
Okay.
apply for that to be funded.
For example, you said this would make a nice wildflower meadow, or let's put in some wildflowers on all the margins. That's going to cost 30 grand. All right, let's apply for the funding to have that all spread over or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Or something you and I have talked about, we want to release black game into the New Forest.
Yeah, used to be there.
Used to be there. So that's a project that you could potentially speak to the lottery fund to have funded over a 5-10 year period.
That is fascinating.
So,
I mean, maybe if I could sit around for 5 or 10 years and go, yeah, I'm going to kick some birds out on there. What are you going to do to actually back it up? Nothing. What are you going to do afterwards? Nothing. Spend some money on
that's sort of
radio
my-
tagging them.
And we're gonna so basically again, I'm harping back to pine martins because it's one I do have a bee in my bonnet about. But pine martins, part of the international conservation convention is you have to, if you're going to do a reintroduction, there are certain criteria you need to meet, and one of them is after the project. So once the project's finished, you need to work out what's gone wrong, what's gone right, etc. So all they put on their application is monitoring. So we need more money for 3 years to monitor them.
Wow. Okay.
But they don't actually do anything if it goes wrong. So they monitor them. So we're going to look at pine martins. So basically buy some camera traps and see if there are pine martins there.
I mean, so there is no obligation to protect the investment.
No. Or to protect the stuff that you said these things wouldn't destroy, such as free-range chicken farms. There's no obligation.
Wow.
And the thing that gets touted out quite a lot, and I think you've said it already, is when we're talking about sheep and shepherds and lynx, is, well, as long as there's a fund for the shepherd from the government to, pay for those 5, 10, 1 sheep that gets eaten or killed or maimed. Well, I'm a taxpayer, John. Why should I pay for that?
Yeah, when you
I
see
didn't
no
want those
benefit back
links.
from it, right?
I get nothing back from it.
I
Now,
mean,
you could say there's
unfortunately, we live in a
biodiversity gain.
democracy.
Yeah, but I mean, I could be getting something back for it. I could go on a lynx safari, or there's some biodiversity gain, or there's some.
You'd have to pay for the lynx
net
safari,
capital.
though.
Of course, you'd have to pay for it, but that's part of the ecotourism. That's going to make far more money than a day's driven shooting. I think not. £2.2 billion sector in shooting. So, but we're not talking about shooting. The other issue I've got with keep moving these links about, these translocations of lynx, and translocations, actually lynx is not the right one, translocations of pine marten, is when I go to these pine marten meetings, which happen across the country, where they're trying to re-establish pine martens. The way the pine martens are breeding in Wales and moving, and with interconnected woodland, the projected model that in 500 years' time they will have recolonised south of England.
That's cool. I think that's pretty cool. We like that or not?
Well,
I mean, that's
they're doing
impressive.
it naturally. So I've got they're doing it naturally.
Bit like the red
so I've
kites.
got absolutely doing it naturally. No problem with that. So why are we? So I think the original project has been a success. It's met all its goals. These things are self-propagating, and their range is expanding. Why are we now moving them further and making it happen quicker? Why are we interfering so much? Because if in 500 years' time they have colonised southern England, the ecosystem's got another 500 years, and humans have got another 500 years to come to terms with that.
Everything will find its balance, right, over that time period, rather than literally setting a fire underneath it and then saying, oh, it'll be fun, we'll figure out what happens.
Yeah, so why do we need it done by 2025, 2030, whenever it is, when it's going to happen anyway? So the mindset I find difficult. Now, if a conservationist comes back to me and says, well, the reason we want to have it done on the New Forest, the Isle of Wight, wherever, the reason is because we think pine martens will do really well there. We think we can create a business from it, and we can create some employment and generate some income, and here's the business model for that, and here's the proven aspect of it. Actually, I don't have a bigger problem with that, because it's putting something back in. Just saying, well, they used to be there,
and someone, they go, I'm going to get loads of money for it, I suppose.
Yeah. That sounds a bit bad saying that, but that gives them a reason. The reason that's often trotted out as well about controlling grey squirrels is unproven. We know they have an effect on the grey squirrel population, but it's more about dispersal than actually killing them. So you're going to have fewer grey squirrels.
They might kill some, but a grey squirrel is quite a hard thing to catch and kill unless you go into its home, I would have thought. There's a lot easier options out there. Birds, nests, chicks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Seems to be pretty simple by comparison.
Yeah, so I think where we've got a decreasing biodiversity in many areas, and shooting estates do tend to buck the trend to that, to put a caveat on it. So decreasing biodiversity, yes, by adding pine marten, you've increased an animal, so theoretically you've increased biodiversity because you put something else there, but that something else is going to eat.
Dig 2 or 3 little ponds on the same ground, you're probably going to increase technical biodiversity in terms of species and prolific excitement more than anything else, right?
Absolutely.
Bit of standing deadwood, bit of standing water. I mean, it might not be like the most wonderful and exciting of stuff, but it is nevertheless exciting. And I guess a lot of that is to do with the fact that a bug isn't marketable. Not really.
I think you're right. I think when we're looking at sort of more benign releases and reintroductions, such as the beaver, for example, amongst most people, the beaver doesn't really. There are lots of benefits they see. Amongst anglers, it's literally a 50-50 divide because of the unknown to these species. Now, I think the beaver is a really good example. That's not an apex predator, so it's slightly unless you're a tree.
Or a fish.
But the beaver, to me, or a fish, yeah, but it depends on the kind of fish as well, you see. So
okay,
that's
interesting.
where
Talk to me about beavers. Like, what is... I don't know a huge amount about the whole beaver debate. Spell out for me. Like, what are the pros, what are the cons? Why wouldn't you want beavers? Because in my head, it's not like It's not that voracious a predator. It's pretty chilled out an animal. They're probably not that prolific, or are they?
They're very prolific. But so part of the benefit of a beaver is they create dams, right? Beaver holts. They live in these dams, so they block water courses. Now, in front and behind those dams, create some really good habitats. And they fell trees into the river, and it creates something called woody debris. So woody debris is good for insects. It's good for aquatic invertebrates. Therefore, small fish have got.
What's that like for flooding? Is it supposed to be good for flood control, or is it technically bad?
Okay, so we've spoken about this before. I worked in Alaska, and there were lots of beavers and lots of beaver dams. And we had a guy, I don't think I spoke about this actually, but in the camp I worked in, there was an ex-Vietnam veteran who his job in the Vietnam War, and we are going down one of these rocky roads, but his job in the Vietnam War was to go down Viet Cong foxholes with grenades and blow them up. That was his entire role for the war. So he would go into these underground tunnels and blow them up. So the next logical step when he finished being in the Rangers, the US Rangers, was to join the Alaskan Fish and Game Department as an explosives operative blowing up beaver dams.
That's pretty cool. I mean, there ever was a niche job. And
I'll try and find a picture of him for you one day. He was so he flew, funny enough, a beaver aeroplane, float plane around, looking for beaver dams. He wore a bandana. Yeah, he wore a bandana. So
he's one of those guys that you look at and you want to be him when you grow up, right? There's no doubt in my mind you want some of that action.
He's just the kind of guy that would look at you at night time when you're all with the clients in the lodge, and he'd stare you in the eye, give you the 500-yard stare, and so you weren't there, man. So that's the kind of guy he was. So essentially, his job was to block beaver dams to alleviate flooding. Okay.
Yeah.
So fast forward,
and that's because you can hold too much water up behind several of these dams, and if they all break at once, that's an issue, or what is it? The water that backs up behind them.
Yeah, so we're talking Alaskan tundra here. So this was more about salmonid migrations and salmon laying eggs in places they shouldn't, with fewer salmon. So 400 years ago it didn't matter because there were loads and loads of salmon, and that was what Pacific salmon did. As there are fewer and overfishing, it's all to do with human interaction, right? It's all to do with human problems we've caused at sea and global warming, etc. So they had to remove a percentage of these dams to keep the waterways clear for salmonid migration, and to stop new lakes being formed and all that sort of stuff that changed the habitat fundamentally for a short period of time. Now it comes back to the right species in the right area for the right reason. So a beaver in a Scottish Highland burn that's going to create some habitat for small salmonids and other small fish, create some aquatic insects, probably isn't a problem.
Yeah, and the impact of it upon humanity, which is the real thing, the human-wildlife conflict here, is maybe 5 people.
Yes, exactly. So it's not a massive problem, and it can have some huge ecological benefits, right? So with this habitat creation, the same animal on a Hampshire chalk stream. Yeah,
you stick that on the tester
just north of. Yeah, or Itchin, just north of Botley, where you're based, Johnny.
Wouldn't be great.
They block the river.
This is a flood-prone area anyway.
Yeah, so they block the river Itchin. The sea trout and the very few salmon that still run the river can't go anywhere because the river's blocked. They can't get over these weirs, these dams. But it has created habitat for barbel, bass, mullet. So it's created habitat for a different species, but is that the species we want? I don't know. Those aren't the questions we're going into. So in that particular instance, that's the wrong animal in the wrong location. Now, the issue with beavers isn't the fact that you can't control the beaver; they're protected species. It's the fact you're not allowed to touch the dam. So on the river,
a little bit like badgers, right? You can't go near the set.
Touch your set. It's exactly the same piece of legislation, actually.
Wow.
So in Scotland, where these animals are blocking watercourses and they're flooding farms, those farmers can't unblock the stream, and that has the potential.
And the beaver's not going to die, right? If you just yank its dam out, I have to go build another one somewhere. Keep it busy.
The way we do it in the UK is we'd yank it out with a 360, no problem. The way they did it in Alaska was slightly different. They used TNT, and I'm pretty sure they would have exploded them to death if they were in the. We've all watched.
Yeah, but they have a lot
Mountain-
of beavers. They trap them, they shoot them, they do all kinds of things to them, and it's just a normal part of their life. I mean, should that
Yeah,
not
I
be
was
the
just gonna
goal
say-
in our case? Have enough that you can just go, that one's a nuisance one, bang, goodbye.
Yes, and that's my other fundamental problem with the release of apex predators. There is no get out of jail free clause. So our laws, our wildlife laws, are so draconian. Once we've got a population of pine martens that it may be 1,000 years' time that is above and beyond the harvestable surplus, it will still be illegal to kill them. Once we've got
Like red kites,
otters-
potentially, right? I was out
Exactly the
picking
same.
my kids up from school. There were 6 kites over the school. There's nothing for them there. Like, there's no pheasant shoot, there's nothing like that, so there's no arguments. There's just a lot of beaks.
Yeah,
And I'm
There
not
are.
saying I want to go out and kill every red kite, but the ideal, like if you see any overabundance of top-end predator in an already fragile ecosystem, should be the ability to go, maybe this was too much of a good thing, right? So what we're saying is you can have too much beavers, and then you just need to... wouldn't it be cool? Why not? What's wrong with that, other than it's against popular opinion? Like to go, I would like so many of these that we can kill them at the end. Or we would like the end goal to have so many beavers that we would like to be able to shoot beavers.
harvest them, and actually you'd make
'Cause
it
you can eat
socially
them.
acceptable. You can eat beaver. You can eat beaver, and you can use the fur. You can use beaver fur. So that's that. So what you do, the marketing would be for me if people wanted to have pine martens or otters or whatever it happens to be, lynx, wolf. All of these skins were used 1,000 years ago for things, and all of this meat was used for other things.
Very
So-
unfashionable now.
but it's only unfashionable because these things were in decline and hunted to extinction. So if, as in the States, there is a surplus of beavers, wolf, mountain lion, whatever it happens to be, those things are harvested in the States, and there is a regulated fur market.
Interesting, there's a
It's not killed for
regulated
no
fur
reason.
market in America, but there's not a regulated meat market. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, which is really fascinating. Probably goes back to the pioneer days, doesn't it, of the Canadians and French Canadians, and that.
I guess when they banned the sale of meat for the commercial meat market, that was the species they're worried about for the majority, I guess. I don't know, it's just interesting.
Yeah, exactly. But if we could get it in the UK that once these species are established and they're thriving, right, and there's going to be, it's just, compare it to deer. So let's say we've released wolves, and they've got to the same sort of, they're at a sustainable level where there can be a harvestable surplus. That should then be allowed. But the issue is that'll never happen, and that's why we can't. So if that were to happen, you'd be very difficult to argue against apex predators, wouldn't it? Because you could then manage them.
Yeah, to me that seems fair, right? You should always set everything up for success, regardless of what you do in life.
Yeah.
Why not just even release them and go, yeah, there's a season on them, or you can apply for a tag or some kind of system whereby if you have a beaver dam on your farm that's flooding it, you can go, I shot this, here you go, because of this.
And actually, in Scotland, until about 5 years ago, that was the case. But then they protected them, and that's what's caused the problem. So what was happening in, I think it's the Tweed Valley, what's happening on the Tweed Valley is these animals were being self-regulated by the farms there. They wanted them. They saw the benefits of beavers to a degree, to a level. And once they got beyond the level, they would cull a few or remove a few dams. But the beavers still thrived. So there was no rhyme or reason to stopping those landowners doing that. They've stopped and these things are now out of control.
Yeah, they were blaming, I presume, the landowners for the spread not being faster. But as you said, release a bear in Hyde Park, you'll soon see people want them regulated. And we've spoken about it before, like when that lynx escaped in Wales, you know what the first thing they did was? Calling people to kill it. Like, without a shadow of doubt, there were calls, and no one had a problem with this thing dying. Even those who did go, well, it's probably better than killing a kid.
And as you've demonstrated, we've gone from 500,000 people. And to put that into context, Wembley Stadium holds 80,000. You know, so just to put it into context, the National Football, Twickenham holds 80,000. Wembley Stadium holds 80,000. So if you were to fill both of those stadiums up, you're on just under half the population, the national population, when lynx were running about. It's not a lot of people.
Yeah, there's a lot of quotes go on about things when it comes to rewilding, and a lot of links go back to Sweden. Because obviously they have a really wonderful wildlife setup over there in terms of allowing you to go out and do your stuff, use the land, do whatever you need. But the Swedish population and I'm going to double check this because I don't want to get it wrong, as we did right at the beginning with the things, is 10.5 million, which is, what, a sixth of the British population, which is pathetic. The UK is 243,610 kilometres squared. Sweden is 450. So it's a 12th of the density, a 13th of the density of population, which is, I mean, it's clearly why it's a nicer place to live, right? But you can't compare apples with oranges, which I think people do, certainly in this release debate. Well, we did it there and it worked really nicely. And I think actually when you speak to anyone on the ground in, for example, Italy, where they have wolves now, anyone who actually lives around them isn't like a huge fan.
I was going to use Italy because I know you've spent a lot of time out there. Have you been in the region where there are wolves, and have you spoken to the people up there or not, John?
Oh, yeah. I'm trying to think. I probably won't get in any trouble by telling the story. I remember the first time that I really clocked there were wolves. We went out for a walk in the mountains after dinner before going out hunting in the evening. And I was like, someone around here's got a really big dog. I went back and chatted to the guys. He goes, no, that's wolf prints, Johnny. I'm like, okay, that's pretty... I mean, again, it's not like you're going to die, but you might. And even that made me feel a bit uneasy, just because you're not used to ever being in a place where something's bigger and more powerful than you, really. But then you speak to the guys on the ground. None of them are that happy, certainly the farmers, because they don't really control the wild boar, because that's hard work. It's affected them in no particularly positive way, right? And then, from my limited understanding, is that they just go and kill them illegally when they're a problem, which is not the correct way to handle an issue, right? But if there's too much bureaucracy in the way, I'm led to understand that is the course of action that is taken. And that's not what we want to see happen in the UK, right? Be put in an awkward situation.
And I think it's the same in Switzerland as well, that they'll take matters into their own hand, which isn't the right way. But that all sort of molds back to the point I was trying to make a few minutes ago about this once they get to a sustainable level, there needs to be a mechanism to be able to control them like we can with deer or brown hares or other problem species. The trouble is here,
you put areas in place where they're safe. Why not do that? You go, well, they're safe here, but they go outside there. That's the barrier. Because you know as well as I do, if you hammer something on your land, it will soon go to another piece of land. Fallow, for example, you hit them hard, they'll just go sit next door.
And I think that's the model in the States, isn't it? You take the national parks, sort of Yellowstone, etc. That's their safe zone. But when they step out, I think you still do need a license. But when they step out and they're worrying livestock, a US farmer can control them to a degree, or an agent of can control them to a degree. And so I think. Could I do a bit of a summary of my thoughts on this?
Yep. Please do.
I think there is a place for the release of apex predators. I don't think it's a hard no. It's not a hard no. Hyde Park for brown bears, that would be so cool. But the apex predator, when it's got to be going into an environment that's ready for it. That's one of my caveats. The second caveat is there's got to be available resources to prop up the other things that might be affected ecologically by that release that we haven't had for a long time. Mm-hmm. And the third thing is that there's got to be a get out of jail free card that you can use if these things become a problem or once they become established and sustainable to harvest. And if those three things are met, or four things are met, my vote's yes for apex predators. But if any one of those isn't met, it's got to then be a hard no.
I like it. I mean, I've always been a fan with, like, the concept of badgers, right? We've seen some real issues with the licensing and badger culling and that kind of thing over the years. And I almost put that sort of down to what we could end up with in the end with some sort of system like this. They could make their lives a lot easier by just putting a week-long season in. 1 week a year, go and kill the ones you don't want. And then you're never going to be able to eradicate a population in a week. But if you do have a problem one, job done.
Yeah, and I think you're describing an American model again, probably without even thinking about it. They do their wildlife census, don't they? And then the bow hunting season on a specific whitetail in a specific county in Illinois might be 3 days because that's the number of deer that will need to be harvested. It might be 6 months. And it's eminently sensible. The US conservation model, Roosevelt, wasn't it? The US conservation model who put it all together is an incredibly complex but equally simple way of managing wildlife that works there because of the public ground. I'm not sure it would work here because of private land.
But I do feel like there's something we could take away from it that would actually be more sensible. The key difference, I
absolutely.
think, not the legislation, is the way that it is funded with the Pittman-Robertson. Like, it makes an awful lot more sense because they have the money to see this through, and I think that would be the death of it in any English context, is that there's no funding for policing, there's no funding to set it up, and where there is no money, no one cares. Right back to the beginning of the conversation, that's why no one gives a shit about caterpillars.
And on that note,
Right, thank you very much once again, Mr. Weston. It has been a fascinating and interesting conversation. I've learned some stuff. I hope you guys who are listening have learned some stuff as well. And, well, until we see bears in Hyde Park, Tim, I'll catch you next time.
hang tough.